9 years ago, Damon Voss vanished from Claire Rowan's life without explanation. No message, no look back. She cried, waited, and learned to live on, alone, with a child in her womb whose fate she didn't know how to tell the world. 9 years later, Damon leads a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire, and he never looked back. Until this morning, when his armored convoy stopped in front of a small seaside bakery, and a boy stepped out with the gray eyes Damon had only ever seen once in a mirror. If you're reading this story, please like and comment the name of the city you're reading below. I want to know how far my story has traveled in this world. And don't leave, because what happens next will change everything. The convoy moved through Harlow Cove like something that didn't belong there. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows rolling down a street built for fishing boats and weekend tourists. The town smelled like salt and low tide and someone's gutters that needed cleaning. Seagulls lifted off the pier ahead and scattered, and the lead driver said nothing because there was nothing to say. This was a fuel stop, a schedule adjustment, 30 minutes of dead time between a meet in Portland and a flight out of a private airstrip 2 counties south. Damon Voss sat in the middle vehicle behind 6 inches of reinforced glass and watched the town slide past like a slow frame of someone else's life. He had his phone in one hand and a half-finished summary of the Portland meeting in the other. The meeting had gone the way meetings went when your name carried enough weight to end conversations before they started. Quickly, completely, with no room left for argument. 3 distribution territories renegotiated. 1 outstanding debt forgiven in exchange for a permanent arrangement. 2 men who had driven 4 hours to push back on the terms, leaving without a single objection between them. He was good at what he did. He had stopped apologizing for that a long time ago. "Brake lights up ahead," said the driver Marcus, without inflection. Marcus had been driving Damon for 6 years. He spoke only when something changed. Damon looked up. A delivery truck was double-parked at the corner, its rear doors hanging open, and a man in an apron stacking empty wooden crates on the sidewalk. The lead SUV had slowed to navigate around it. The whole convoy was crawling now, 3 vehicles pressed together in a narrow coastal street. And that was the kind of thing that made Damon's security chief, Reyes, reach for his radio from the passenger seat of the front vehicle. "It's a bakery truck," Marcus said. "Not a threat, just information." Damon looked at the building behind the truck, a hand-painted sign above a wide front window. The paint was a faded green, the letters slightly uneven, like someone had done it themselves and hadn't quite trusted the stencil. Rowan's Bakery. The window was fogged at the bottom edges from the warmth inside. Through the glass, he could see a long wooden counter, a chalkboard menu, the orange glow of an oven light visible through a pass-through at the back. And then the smell hit him. It came through the ventilation system before he could register what it was. Warm bread, butter, something faintly sweet underneath. And beneath all of that, a specific quality of heat, the kind that belongs only to a working oven in a small kitchen. It was such an ordinary smell. It had no business doing what it did to the interior of his chest. He felt his ribs tighten around his lungs, and he did not know why until the image arrived unbidden. A farmhouse kitchen, early morning, flour on a wooden countertop, and a woman laughing at something she'd burned, scraping it into the trash without the slightest embarrassment. He pressed the memory down before it could develop further. He was practiced at that. The lead SUV cleared the delivery truck. Marcus began to ease forward. Then the bakery door swung open and a boy came out carrying a wide wooden tray covered with a cloth, walking with the careful, deliberate focus of a child who had been trusted with something breakable. He was maybe 8, maybe 9, wearing a brown apron 3 sizes too large for him with the strings double knotted in front. His hair was dark, his face was narrow. He stepped onto the sidewalk and turned to hold the door open with one foot while he repositioned the tray in his arms. And in doing so, he looked up directly at the convoy as it crept past. He wasn't afraid of the vehicles. He didn't step back or look down the way most civilians did when 3 black SUVs with no visible plates rolled through a quiet neighborhood. He just looked at them with the unhurried curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to perform unease for other people's benefit. His eyes were gray, not blue-gray, not green-gray, a flat, true, uncommon gray that Damon recognized with a physical shock that moved from his sternum down through his gut and didn't stop. "Stop the car," he said. Marcus braked. The entire convoy halted. Reyes came through the radio immediately. "Problem?" Damon didn't answer. He was staring at the boy through the tinted glass. The boy couldn't see him. The boy was just standing there on the sidewalk holding his tray, waiting for a path through the vehicles to open up, adjusting his grip, squinting slightly against the morning light off the water. Those eyes. Damon had looked at his own face in enough mirrors over enough years to know the particular shade of gray he was looking at. It was not common. His mother had called it a Voss trait, the one constant across 4 generations of a family that had never agreed on much else. His grandfather had them. His father had them. He had them. His sister did not, but she had taken their mother's brown, and as far as Damon was aware, he had never passed them to anyone. As far as he was aware. The thought arrived in his mind fully formed, and he rejected it immediately. He rejected it because it was the kind of thought that men in his position could not afford to have without evidence, because the consequences of being wrong were too steep, and the consequences of being right were something he wasn't ready to name. He rejected it, and he sat very still in the back of the armored vehicle, and he looked at a 9-year-old boy with gray eyes holding a tray of pastries outside a bakery in a coastal town he had never been to before this morning. "Mr. Voss," Reyes said through the radio, "we're blocking traffic." "I know." "Sir, give me a minute." The boy's attention had shifted. Someone had called to him from inside the bakery. Damon could see the door was still propped open, and the boy turned toward the sound. He responded with something short, impatient, the way children respond when they've been interrupted mid-task. Then he shifted the tray to one arm, with impressive balance, and used his free hand to tug at the strings of his apron, which had come partially undone. And then the door opened wider and a woman stepped out. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel tucked into her waistband. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a loose knot, a few strands free around her face from the kitchen heat. She was wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a flour smear on the left forearm she hadn't noticed. She came out looking at the boy, not at the street, saying something to him about the tray, reaching out to straighten the cloth covering it. Claire Rowan. Damon's hand closed around the door handle before he made a decision. He noticed that happening, his body moving ahead of his mind, which was still somewhere back in the aftermath of what he was looking at. The bakery, the boy, the gray eyes, and now her, here, in this town, alive and present, and close enough that if he opened the door, he would be standing on the same sidewalk. He had believed, not known, believed, because there had never been proof, only the terrible logic of disappearance, that she had made a choice, that the summer had ended and she had ended it with the summer, the way certain things end cleanly when they were only ever meant to be temporary. He had told himself that the silence was an answer. He had built an entire internal architecture around that answer over 9 years, and it had held up because he had never had reason to test it. He was testing it now. Claire looked up from the boy. She looked at the convoy the way people in small towns look at things that don't belong, not with fear but with a mild, puzzled attention, the kind you give to an object out of place. She looked at the middle SUV. She couldn't see through the glass. She was looking at her own reflection, and she didn't know it. Then the boy said something, and she smiled, and the smile was the one Damon remembered, sudden and unguarded, the kind that started in the eyes before the mouth got involved, and the interior of Damon's chest did something he was not going to describe to anyone. He let go of the door handle. "Drive," he said. Marcus drove. The convoy cleared the corner. Harlow Cove fell away behind them. Reyes did not ask questions because 6 years of working for Damon Voss had taught him when questions were not the thing. Damon sat with his phone face down on his knee and looked at nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Pull over." Marcus pulled into the lot of a hardware store 2 blocks from the water. The lead and rear vehicles stopped behind him. Reyes was out of the passenger seat in under 4 seconds, coming to stand beside the rear door, and Damon stepped out into the cold, salt air and walked 6 paces away from the vehicles with his hands in his coat pockets. He did the arithmetic. 9 years ago, late August, he had been 29. She had been 26. He had met her in a different coastal town 3 hours north, a place he'd been hiding while his father's empire was being dismantled from inside by men who had served the Voss family for decades, and decided the loyalty was no longer worth what it cost. He had been there for 6 weeks under a name no one would recognize. He had met her at a fish market on a Tuesday morning. He had stayed 6 weeks, and then the world had caught up to him, and he had left in 2 hours with no preparation and no clean way to explain what was happening to a woman who knew him only as a man named Daniel, who didn't talk about his work. He had tried to reach her afterward. He had tried several times in the first year. The number he had was disconnected. The address he had was a rental. He had not tried harder because trying harder required resources that were traceable, and the succession war had not yet finished, and he had made a decision that he understood now. With the particular clarity of a man standing in a hardware store parking lot on the Maine coast, had been a cowardice dressed up as pragmatism. He had told himself she had moved on. He had told himself she had chosen to move on. He had told himself this enough times that it had become structural, load-bearing, a part of the foundation that his subsequent 9 years were built on. He thought about the boy, the gray eyes, the narrow face, the dark hair, the height, the build, the way he carried himself, careful and unsentimental, efficient with his movements. The apron nodded with a double hitch like he'd been shown once and remembered it completely. Damon did the arithmetic again. 9 years. The boy looked 8, maybe 9. He breathed in cold air and let it out slowly. Reyes appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision, not speaking, just present, reading the situation the way a good security man reads a situation, with patience and without assumption. "I need you to do something quiet," Damon said. His voice was flat, operational. "Name it." "The bakery we passed? Rowan's. I need a full background on the owner, quietly. Nothing that touches the ground inside the organization. Go through the outside contact we use for private work." Reyes processed this without expression. "Timeline?" "Today." Damon paused. "And I need to know if the owner has any children, ages, everything documented." "Understood." Damon turned and walked back to the vehicle. He got in. Marcus started the engine without being told. The convoy pulled back onto the main road and headed south, and Damon watched the rearview mirror as the water and the town and the small green-painted bakery sign shrank and disappeared behind a stand of pine trees. He told himself it was probably nothing. He did not believe himself. The background arrived in pieces over the next 18 hours. Reyes used the outside contractor they kept for sensitive work, a woman named Adler, who had worked insurance investigations before she'd found that certain private clients paid 3 times as much for the same research without the institutional oversight. Adler did not ask what the information was for. That was why she was paid what she was paid. Damon was at the Airstrip Hotel south of Portland when the first file came through on a secured device. He sat on the edge of the bed in his room and read it in the gray light coming off the lamp. Claire Marie Rowan, age 35, born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Moved to Harlow Cove approximately 8 years ago, 4 months before which she had been residing at an address in Gloucester, Massachusetts, the same town where Damon had spent 6 weeks under a borrowed name 9 years ago. Gloucester. She hadn't gone back to Portsmouth. She had moved first to Gloucester and then to here, and between those 2 addresses she had been briefly hospitalized at a facility in Boston. Reason listed as a standard maternity record, discharge date consistent with a full-term delivery in early spring. Early spring. 9 months after late August. Damon closed the file. He set the device on the nightstand and sat with his hands on his knees for a long time. The room had a heating unit under the window that clicked and hissed. Outside, a red light blinked on a radio tower at regular intervals, marking the sky's edge in the dark. He picked the device back up. Noah James Hale. That was the name. Hale, not Rowan. Damon noted that and set it aside for now. Age 8, currently enrolled in 3rd grade at Harlow Cove Elementary. Adler had included a school photograph from a public directory listing. The photograph was small, a standard ID image, the kind taken every fall in a gymnasium with a blue background and a photographer who asked children to smile without actually explaining why. The boy in the photograph was smiling anyway. He had not needed the explanation. Damon looked at the photograph for 3 minutes without moving. He looked at the jawline, the ears, small and set close to the head, the brow. The cheekbones that had not yet hardened into whatever they would eventually become, but already carried a structural suggestion that Damon found impossible to look at without his throat tightening. The eyes. He thought about his grandfather's portrait in the study of the Voss estate in Connecticut. He thought about the gray. He thought about his father, dead 6 years, and the last conversation they'd had, which had been about succession and legacy, and whether Damon had any intention of producing an heir, or whether the Voss line would end with a man too careful and too controlled to let anyone close enough to matter. He thought about that conversation now, in a hotel room in Maine, holding a photograph of a third grader with Voss eyes. And the irony was so complete and so brutal that it was almost funny. It was not funny. He set the device down. He picked up his phone and called Reyes. I need a DNA testing service, private, no institutional connection, the kind that moves fast and forgets afterward. Reyes, because he had worked for Damon for 6 years and had learned to trust the operational necessity of things, even when their context was unclear, said, I can have a name in an hour. I also need surveillance on the bakery, passive, nothing close. I want to know the routine, the hours, when she's there, when she isn't, when the boy is there. I want to know who comes and goes. A pause. This is personal, sir? Yes. Another pause, shorter. I'll handle it myself. Damon ended the call. He stood at the window and looked at the radio tower and its slow, regular, patient blinking. He had built his entire adult life on the principle that information preceded action, that you did not move until you knew what you were moving into, that certainty was the only foundation worth anything in a world where everything else could be bought, sold, or taken. He needed certainty. He needed it badly enough that the alternative, going back to that street, knocking on that door, looking Claire Rowan in the face with nothing but arithmetic and a photograph and 9 years of questions, was something he refused to consider until he had earned the right to ask them. He would do this correctly. 2 days later, the operational reason that had brought him to Maine dissolved into a successful resolution, and he should have left. His schedule said Portland to New York via the private airstrip, meetings Thursday through Saturday, a situation in Philadelphia that required his physical presence the following Monday. He rerouted through Harlow Cove. He told himself it was reconnaissance. He was good at believing the names he gave things. Reyes had established a passive observation post in a rented car on the street parallel to the bakery, 2 blocks north. Damon parked there in the early morning of a cold Wednesday, a coffee in his hand, wearing a wool coat and a watch he didn't normally wear because the one he normally wore was recognizable. He was not wearing the watch as a disguise. He was not in disguise. He was simply sitting in a car drinking coffee on a public street, which was something anyone could do. The bakery opened at 7. He watched from a distance. Claire arrived first. She came on foot from the direction of the residential streets east of the water, wearing a jacket and carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder, walking with her head slightly down against the wind off the harbor. She had her keys out before she reached the door. She let herself in, and within 15 minutes, the lights were on inside and a faint ghost of steam rose from the exhaust vent at the side of the building. The boy arrived 40 minutes later, dropped off by a car Adler had identified as belonging to a woman named Patty Delacroix, mid-60s, listed at an address 4 streets over. A neighbor, probably a daycare arrangement of some kind, someone who looked after Noah on mornings when Claire needed to be at the bakery early. Noah jumped out of the car with the specific explosive energy of an 8-year-old who had been sitting still for too long and ran the last 6 steps to the bakery door and pushed through it without knocking, because he didn't need to knock because it was his. Damon watched this. He set down his coffee because his hand was not entirely steady, and he didn't want to look at that. Over the next 90 minutes, 3 things happened. A delivery driver dropped off a flat of something. A pair of elderly women came in and stayed for nearly 40 minutes, leaving with a white box tied with twine. A man in a postal uniform stopped for what Damon calculated to be a 12-minute coffee break. None of this was remarkable. What was remarkable was the small window in the side of the building, which looked into what appeared to be a prep area, and through which Damon could see, not clearly at this distance through 2 panes of glass, the occasional movement of people working. At 9:15, he watched a small figure climb onto a step stool at the work counter and begin something that involved both hands and considerable concentration. The figure was too small to see over the counter without the stool. It worked for 11 minutes and then climbed back down and disappeared. Damon sat with this. He had held weapons in these hands. He had signed documents in these hands that had restructured criminal territories across 4 states. He had, in these hands, done things he did not revisit in daylight, and he had made a private compact with himself decades ago that whatever he felt about those things would be felt once and then filed and never handled again, because handling it repeatedly served no purpose and cost more than it returned. He was not holding it together particularly well right now. He was aware of that. He was sitting in a parked car watching a child he had no confirmed right to claim, and every minute of it was costing him something he didn't have a name for. The DNA test was in process. Adler had arranged it through a private medical service, 2 technicians who worked out of a lab outside of Boston and specialized in sensitive matters for clients who required discretion. The samples had been collected, Damon's without difficulty, the child's through a method Reyes had managed without anyone's knowledge, a cup from the trash outside the bakery, handled correctly, properly preserved. The lab had been given 72 hours. Standard turnaround for this level of service was 5 to 7 days. The premium arrangement moved it considerably faster. 72 hours. He would not go back to the bakery in those 72 hours. He would not drive past it. He would not ask Reyes for additional surveillance reports. He would do the thing he was best at, which was operating within a discipline he had set for himself. And he would wait for the information before he decided what the information meant. He put the car in drive. He drove south. He did not look in the mirror. But the results were intercepted on a Thursday night. Damon didn't know this yet. He wouldn't know for several days. What he knew on Thursday night was that the 72-hour window had passed and no report had arrived on the secured device. And when he contacted Adler, she said the lab had confirmed completion and transmission and the file had been sent to the correct secure address. It was not at the correct secure address. Damon's security architecture was good. It was better than good. It had been built over years by professionals who understood that information was the most dangerous commodity in his world, and that protecting it required the same rigor as protecting anything physical. He had layers. He had redundancies. He had a system. Systems could be penetrated from inside. He didn't know this yet either. What he knew Thursday night was that a file he was waiting for had not arrived, and that Adler was certain it had been sent, and that this specific combination, confirmed transmission, no receipt, meant something had happened between the 2 points. He ran his own diagnostic. He found nothing obvious. He contacted the secondary channel and ran it again. Still nothing. He told Reyes. Reyes was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Who inside the organization knows about the lab request?" "You." "Only me?" "Only you." Reyes was quiet again. Damon knew what he was thinking because he was thinking it himself. A leak required a source. If the source was not Reyes, and Damon had reason to trust Reyes more than he trusted most things, then the source was elsewhere, which meant someone had been watching the process from the outside, which meant someone had known to watch. "I'll dig," Reyes said. "Dig fast," Damon said, and quietly. "If someone inside the organization is looking at my personal business, I want to know the full shape of it before they know I'm looking back." He ended the call. He sat in the study of his New York apartment, the one that faced the river, and he looked at the secured device that should have carried a DNA report and didn't. In the morning, he would learn that the report had not simply vanished. It had been replaced. The secure address had received a file that appeared to be the lab's report, with the correct formatting and the correct lab identifiers, but with different content. The forged document showed no biological match, no familial relationship, no shared markers. Someone had gone to considerable effort to tell him that Noah Hale was not his son. Someone had done this carefully and quickly, and with access to systems they should not have had access to. Damon looked at the forged file for a long time. Then he looked at his own hands. Then he thought about a photograph of a boy with gray eyes on a step stool behind a bakery counter, working at something with both hands and considerable concentration, and he thought about the arithmetic he had done 4 times now, and arrived at the same answer each time. He closed the forged file. He did not believe it. And whoever had sent it had just made, without knowing it, the worst miscalculation of their professional life. Because Damon Voss had spent 9 years being careful and controlled and strategic, and he had been all of those things for 9 years in part because he had nothing that mattered enough to make him otherwise. That calculation had just changed. He picked up his phone. He called Adler directly. "The file you sent me," he said. "I need you to send it again, different channel, encrypted differently, and I need you to keep a copy locked outside the normal system." Adler understood the implication without being told. "Someone's in your house." "Possibly." "Timeline on the second transmission?" "Tonight," Damon said. "And Adler?" "Tell no one." He set the phone down. He sat very still while the city moved outside his window, and he let himself feel for 30 seconds the full weight of what was happening. The boy, the gray eyes, the forged document, and the organization he had spent his adult life building, inside which something old and patient and dangerous had been waiting for exactly this. 30 seconds. Then he filed it. He had work to do, and somewhere 300 miles north, in a bakery that smelled like warm bread and butter, a boy with his eyes was climbing down from a step stool and not knowing any of it. Not the man in the parked car, not the forged report, not the machinery of consequence that had just begun, quietly and irrevocably, to move in his direction. The second file arrived at 2:47 in the morning. Damon was not asleep. He had not attempted sleep. He was at the desk in his study with the lamp on low and a glass of water he hadn't touched, going through 6 months of internal communication logs that Reyes had pulled from the organization's secondary server. Not the primary, because whoever was watching knew the primary, but the secondary, which ran parallel and quiet, and which very few people knew existed. He had been going through the logs for 4 hours. He had found 3 anomalies. None of them were conclusive. All of them pointed in the same direction. The secured device vibrated once. He opened it. Adler had used a routing chain he didn't recognize, which meant she'd built it fresh for this transmission, which meant she was taking the situation seriously. He opened the file. He read it once straight through without stopping. He set the device down on the desk. He picked up the glass of water and drank half of it. He set it down. He looked at the window and the city beyond it, the particular orange dark of a Manhattan night, and he sat with what he had just read for approximately 90 seconds. Then he picked the device back up and read it again. The results were unambiguous. The lab had included a confidence notation at the bottom of the report, 99.97%, the standard ceiling for this type of analysis, the number that forensic geneticists used when they meant certain. The shared markers were listed in a table. The familial classification was stated in one line of plain language at the top of the results section, before all the supporting data, because the supporting data was just evidence for something the first line had already declared. Damon Voss was Noah Hale's biological father. He did not feel what he expected to feel, which was some version of shock. The arithmetic had already done its work. The gray eyes had already done their work. What he felt instead was something closer to the sensation of a door opening into a room he had been standing outside for 9 years, without realizing he'd been standing there, and the room was not what he'd feared and not what he'd hoped, and was simply enormously real. He also felt the cold, specific clarity of a man who now understood exactly what the forged report had been trying to prevent him from knowing, and who was doing the geometry on what that meant, who had access, who had motive, who inside his organization had reason to want a legitimate heir erased from the picture before Damon knew the heir existed. He thought about his uncle. He thought about that for a long time. Then he called Reyes. Reyes came to the apartment at 4 in the morning, which was the hour Damon had specified, because 4 in the morning was when the city was quiet enough that arrivals and departures were easy to track, and Damon wanted to be able to track them. Reyes came alone, which he had been told to do. He came in through the building's service entrance, which he knew how to use, and he came up the back elevator, which required a key that only 3 people had. He sat across from Damon in the study, and he read the real report, and he read the forged report side by side on the 2 devices, and when he was done, he set both devices on the desk and looked at Damon with an expression that was not quite neutral. "Your uncle," Reyes said. "Tell me what you found." Reyes reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet of paper. Physical, not digital, which was a choice Damon noted and approved of, and laid it on the desk without unfolding it. The secondary server logs show access requests originating from a terminal in the Connecticut facility. 3 in the past 2 weeks. The first was the night you called Adler. The second was the night the fake report was transmitted. The third was last night. He paused. The Connecticut facility is your uncle's primary operational base. Who has access to that terminal? 4 people with documented clearance, but clearance can be borrowed. Reyes looked at him steadily. Victor Voss has had a separate private security detail operating outside your knowledge for approximately 14 months. I found this in the server logs. They appear on no official manifest. They are paid through a subsidiary 3 layers removed from the main organization. Damon said nothing. He's been building something parallel, Reyes said, for over a year. What else? The mercenary group that took the Portland contract last spring, the one we subcontracted and then ended the relationship with after the Garfield Street incident. Reyes's jaw was set. 2 of the men from that group have appeared in Maine in the past 6 days. Harlow Cove. One is renting a room above a marine supply store 4 blocks from the bakery. The other is in a motel on the highway south of town. The room was very quiet. They're watching her, Damon said. They've been watching her since before you stopped in that town. Reyes's voice was careful and precise. Which means someone knew about the woman before you did. Someone knew there was a connection before the DNA test existed. Damon looked at the folded paper on the desk. He did not touch it. Victor knew, he said. It was not a question. That's my assessment. For how long? Reyes was quiet for a moment. The subsidiary that funds his private detail was created 17 months ago. If he had investigators working in parallel, and the Connecticut server activity suggests he did, it's possible he's known about the boy for most of that time. 17 months. Noah would have been 7. Damon thought about a 7-year-old in an apron on a step stool and felt something move through him that he pressed flat before it could fully arrive. He was waiting to see if I'd find out on my own, Damon said. That's my read. As long as you didn't know, there was no need to act. The moment you stopped in Harlow Cove and started asking questions, Reyes stopped. The dynamic changed. Yes, sir. Damon stood up. He walked to the window. The city was doing what the city did at 4 in the morning, which was move in reduced form. A skeleton version of itself. A few lights and a few vehicles, and the permanent orange glow of its own accumulated presence. He looked at it for a while. He had looked at the city from this window for 6 years, and it had never once managed to be beautiful to him, which was something he had always taken as evidence of his own practicality. Get the men in Maine out of their positions, he said, the ones watching the bakery. Reyes hesitated. Sir, if Victor's people see surveillance lifted, they won't see it lifted, they'll see it replaced. He turned from the window. I want our people in closer. I want them inside the perimeter. And I want them better than whatever Victor is using, which is not a high bar given the Garfield Street incident. Understood. Reyes paused. And the woman? Damon looked at him. She doesn't know any of this, Reyes said. Not accusatory, just precise. No. If Victor's people escalate, they won't escalate yet. Victor is strategic. He won't move until he has certainty about what I know. Damon picked up the real DNA report. He looked at it once more and then locked it in the desk drawer with a key he kept on his person. He doesn't have certainty. I need to use that window. To do what? Damon thought about this. He thought about the correct answer, which was to use the window to build a case and dismantle Victor's parallel infrastructure before it could act, to do this quietly and decisively and with no civilian exposure. To handle it the way every other problem had been handled, surgically and at a remove. He thought about the boy on the step stool. I'm going back to Harlow Cove, he said. Reyes did not say anything for a moment, then, as yourself? I haven't decided yet. Sir, I haven't decided, Damon repeated, and the flatness in his voice closed the subject. Reyes stood. He picked up the folded paper from the desk. I'll have the perimeter reset by tonight. What's your timeline? Tomorrow morning? Reyes nodded once and left the way he'd come, through the service entrance, in the elevator with the key. Damon heard none of it. He was at the window again, and the city was below him, and 300 miles north a bakery was dark and locked, and a boy named Noah was asleep somewhere, and Damon was doing a calculation that had nothing to do with organization or territory or the geometry of power. He was calculating how much time he had before something he could not control forced a decision he wasn't ready to make. He thought, not much. He thought, move on. He drove himself, which Reyes objected to and which Damon overruled without discussion. He took a car from the secondary pool, registered to a shell company, nothing that traced back to anything obvious. He left the city at 6 in the morning and drove north in light traffic with the radio off, wearing a jacket he didn't normally wear and 3 days of beard he hadn't bothered to address. He was in Harlow Cove before 10. He did not go to the bakery directly. He stopped at the harbor, parked, and walked the length of the waterfront twice, getting the geography in his body the way you needed to have it when a town might become operational. He noted the sight lines, the choke points, the streets that fed into the bakery block from the north and south, the alley behind the building that ran between the bakery and a hardware supply warehouse. He noted the motel 2 blocks off the main strip where one of Victor's men was staying, and he noted the marine supply store and the windows above it. He bought a coffee at a place on the water. He drank it standing at the rail, looking at the boats. He was aware that he was stalling. He identified this with the same blunt clarity he applied to most things, and then continued stalling for another 4 minutes because 4 minutes was apparently what he needed. Then he walked to the bakery. It was a Thursday morning, not quite 11, and the place had the settled activity of mid-morning commerce. Not the rush of opening, not the quiet of the pre-lunch lull, but a steady middle state. 2 tables occupied, a woman at the counter ordering something, the sound of something metal being moved in the kitchen beyond the pass-through. He walked in. The smell hit him again. He had been prepared for it this time, and it still hit him. The woman at the counter finished her order and moved to a table. Damon stood at the counter and looked at the chalkboard menu and listened to the kitchen and waited. Claire came through the pass-through carrying a small crate of muffins. She set them in the display case. She straightened up and turned to the counter, and she looked at Damon, and her face did something he didn't fully catch because he was watching all of it simultaneously, and the specific sequence happened very fast. Recognition, confusion, doubt, recognition again, and then she went very still. She was holding the empty crate against her hip. Her knuckles were white on the edge of it. "Hi," Damon said. It was the worst thing he could have said. It was what came out. Claire looked at him for a long time. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were doing the same calculation his had done 3 days ago through tinted glass, going through the arithmetic of years and possibility, and arriving somewhere that clearly cost her something. "You need to leave," she said. Her voice was low and level and extremely controlled. "I'm not going to do that. This is my business. I'm asking you to leave." "Claire, do not." 2 words, precise as a cut. She set the crate down on the counter between them with a careful, deliberate movement, like she was giving herself 2 seconds to handle what was happening in her chest. "Do not say my name. Do not stand in my bakery and say my name like that." The other customers were not looking at them. Damon was aware of this in the peripheral way you were aware of all neutral elements when a situation was active. "I need to talk to you," he said. "You needed to talk to me 9 years ago." Her eyes were steady and furious, and underneath the fury was something older and much worse. "You needed to talk to me the morning after. You needed to talk to me for the month I tried to reach you. You needed to talk to me when you had a working phone number and a reason and 8 years of opportunity." She stopped. She breathed. "You don't get to walk into this place and need something." "I know. Don't do that either." "Do what?" "Agree with me to manage me." She picked up the crate again. "I'm going to go back into my kitchen. When I come back out, you'll be gone. That's what's going to happen." She went into the kitchen. Damon stood at the counter. He looked at the chalkboard. He looked at the display case. He counted to 30, which was the number he'd decided on, the number that gave her enough time and him enough space. Then he went around the end of the counter. There was a short hallway behind the pass-through. He went through it. The kitchen was small and hot, and organized with the efficiency of a person who had learned to operate alone. Sheet pans on a rack along one wall, a commercial oven taking up most of the back, a central work island with a flour-dusted surface and a small step stool pushed to one side of it. The step stool had a strip of electrical tape on the top step that someone had put there to make the surface less slippery. Claire was at the work island with her back to him. She had her hands flat on the surface and her head down, and she was breathing in a way that was not about the exertion of kitchen work. "You shouldn't be back here," she said. She did not turn around. "I know about Noah," Damon said. The silence was total. Even the oven seemed to pause. Claire turned around slowly. The look on her face was not anger and not fear. It was something worse. The look of a person who has been preparing for a specific conversation for a long time and has decided multiple times that it would never happen and is now watching that preparation come due. "What did you say?" she said, very quietly. "I know about Noah." He kept his voice even. This was the most important thing right now, the tone, the steadiness, the signal that this was not an accusation. "I stopped in town 3 days ago. I saw him through the window. I saw you, and I did the math." Her hands were flat on the island behind her, pressed hard. "You did the math!" "I got a test done." "You—" She stopped. Something moved across her face that was not quite comprehension. "You got a DNA test?" "Yes." "Without my knowledge?" "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up a dish towel from the counter beside her and she threw it onto the floor, which was apparently the outlet that was available to her, and she turned back to the island and gripped the edge of it and did not speak for 10 seconds. "You don't have the right," she said. "Legally." "I'm not talking about legally." She turned back to him. Her eyes were bright and her voice was precise and steady in the way that voices got when they were carrying a great deal at extreme pressure. "I'm talking about you. Showing up here, doing things in secret around my child. You don't have the right to that." "He might be my child." "Might." The word landed like something physical. "You had 9 years. You had 9 years to show up with your might and your math and your tests." She stopped. "Why are you here, Damon? Right now? Why today?" He thought about telling her about the forged report and the men in the motel and his uncle. He thought about the geometry of what she needed to know and when. He thought about the fact that she was a civilian in a bakery, and he was a man who had done the kinds of things he had done, and that the distance between those two realities was not bridgeable in a kitchen conversation. He told her part of the truth. "I came because I needed to see you," he said. "Not to make a claim, not to... I don't know what I'm doing exactly. I haven't known what I'm doing since the moment I saw him." Something shifted in her face. Not softening, not forgiveness, but something. "The test," she said. "What did it show?" He held her gaze. "You already know what it showed." She closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long moment. When she opened them, she looked very tired, the specific exhaustion of someone who has held a weight for so long that the release of it is not relief, but simply the discovery of how heavy it actually was. "He doesn't know," she said. "I know. You're not going to walk up to him and, no, I'm not going to do anything without your involvement. Not one thing." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then the back door of the kitchen opened and the boy came in, letting in a slice of cold salt air before he got the door closed behind him. And he was wearing his school jacket and carrying a backpack that was evidently too heavy because one strap had slipped off his shoulder and was trailing behind him. He stopped when he saw Damon. He looked at Damon with the same unhurried gray gaze he'd turned on the convoy 4 days ago. No fear, no performance, just the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who had not yet learned to disguise his assessment of things. "Hi," Noah said. "Hi," Damon said. His voice came out level because he made it come out level by a physical act of will that cost him more than most things he'd done. "Are you a customer?" "Noah," Claire said. "What? I'm just asking." He dropped his backpack by the door and began pulling off his jacket. "Ms. Delacroix let me out early because Mr. Farley had a dentist thing, so last period was study hall, and she said I could walk over if I wanted." He was addressing this to his mother with the particular flowing justification of a child preempting the question he expected. Then he looked at Damon again. "We have apple rye today. It's good. I helped roll the dough." Damon looked at the step stool against the island. He looked at the boy. "Is that right?" he said. "Mom lets me do the scoring too, but only with the curved one because the straight one is too sharp." Noah said this as a statement of significant professional fact. He was hanging his jacket on a hook by the door with the absorption of someone completing an important task. "Noah, go wash up and start your reading," Claire said. Her voice was very controlled. Noah grabbed his backpack and went through the interior door without further ceremony. The door swung shut. The kitchen was quiet. Claire looked at Damon. Damon looked at the door. "You need to go," she said, quietly. "Come back tomorrow morning before we open. 7 o'clock. We'll talk." She stopped. "But if you come back honest. All of it. I want to know where you were. I want to know why you disappeared. I want to know what 9 years of your life looked like. Because whatever you are now, I need to know it before I make any decisions about my son." Damon nodded. "And Damon," she waited until he looked at her, "I need you to understand that he is my son first, not a Voss, not an heir, not whatever the next 9 years of your life are going to look like. He is a boy who rolls dough and scores bread with the curved knife, and nothing that happens between you and me changes what he is." "I understand. Do you?" He held her gaze. "I do." He left through the back door. The cold hit him as soon as he was outside, the salt air and the low gray sky of the Maine coast in October, and he stood in the alley behind the bakery and put his hands in his coat pockets and breathed. He was 15 feet from his son. He was 15 feet from a woman who had raised that son alone for 9 years because of a succession war and a disconnected number and the particular cowardice of a 29-year-old man who had told himself the silence was an answer. He stood there for a while. Then he heard something that was not the wind and not the gulls from the harbor, and not the ordinary sounds of a coastal town at 11 in the morning. It was the sound of a car engine idling, coming from the far end of the alley, and it had been idling since before he came out the door, which meant whoever was in it had known he was there before he knew they were. He did not look directly at the car. He walked the opposite direction, unhurried, hands in his pockets, until he cleared the alley and turned north onto the main street. Then he got out his phone and called Reyes. "The marine supply store," he said. "The man upstairs." He moved. Reyes's response was immediate. "When?" "He's in the alley behind the bakery right now." Damon kept walking, keeping his pace even, his face neutral. "He made me." Or he was already watching the back entrance. He paused. "Either way, I'll redirect our team." "Don't." He stopped at the corner. The harbor was ahead. "I want to know what he reports back. Let him watch. Let him send his information. I want to know what Victor thinks I'm doing here before I tell him anything different." Reyes was quiet for a beat. "That's a risk." "I know what it is. If Victor decides the window is closing, he's strategic. He won't move yet." Damon looked at the water. The boats were still. The light was flat and gray. "He'll watch first. He always watches first." He ended the call. He stood at the harbor's edge and thought about tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock and a woman who wanted the truth. And he thought about all the things that the truth contained. And he thought about a boy who had told him about the curved knife and the apple rye bread with the easy confidence of a child who was entirely at home in his own world. He thought, tomorrow. And then his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize, routed through a relay he identified in 3 seconds as belonging to his uncle's private communications infrastructure, and the message contained 4 words. "Come home. We'll talk." Damon looked at the message for a long time. He thought about Victor in the Connecticut facility, watching server logs and surveillance reports, and the movements of a nephew who had just discovered something that changed everything. Victor knew he was in Harlow Cove. Victor knew why. And Victor had just decided that watching was no longer sufficient. Damon typed back a single word. When? The reply came in under 30 seconds. Now. He looked at the harbor. He looked north in the direction of a bakery he could no longer see. He thought about 7 o'clock tomorrow morning and the things Claire Rowan deserved to hear and the son he had not yet earned the right to claim. Then he got in his car and drove south toward Connecticut, because the only way to protect what was behind him was to go directly at what was ahead. And because Victor Voss had made the mistake of believing that the nephew he had managed and outmaneuvered for 30 years was the same man who had stopped in a coastal town 3 days ago and looked through tinted glass at a pair of gray eyes. He was not that man anymore. He was not entirely sure what man he was, but he was moving, and the thing he was moving toward had waited long enough. The Voss estate sat on 40 acres of Connecticut shoreline, behind a gate that had not been opened to uninvited guests in 30 years. Damon had grown up inside that gate. He had learned to read his father's silences in the dining room at the east end of the main house, had learned the difference between the kind of quiet that meant patience and the kind that meant danger, had learned by the time he was 12 that the estate's beauty, the stone walls, the formal garden, the view of the Sound through a row of old oaks, was architectural camouflage, the same way certain animals were beautiful specifically because they were lethal. He drove through the gate at 2:30 in the afternoon. The gate attendant logged his plate without expression. The drive curved through the oaks and deposited him in front of the main house, and he sat in the car for a moment before getting out, doing the thing he did before walking into a room where the geometry was uncertain. He breathed. He placed every piece of known information in order. He identified the gaps. The gaps were considerable. He did not let that change his pace. Victor Voss was waiting in the study, not the main study, the smaller one on the north side of the house that had been their father's private room, the one with the portrait and the old mahogany desk and the window that looked out not at the garden but at the service road and the back gate, because their father had always preferred to watch the exits. Victor had taken this room after their father's death 6 years ago. He had taken several things after their father's death that had not, strictly speaking, been his to take. The will had been structured to give Damon operational authority over the organization and Victor a senior advisory role with significant financial compensation. Victor had interpreted the advisory role liberally. Damon had allowed it. That had been a decision he was currently reassessing. Victor was standing at the window when Damon came in. He was 61 years old, trim, with the elder Voss coloring, dark hair gone silver at the temples, the jaw that ran in the family, the posture of a man who had spent his entire life in rooms where his standing was never quite settled and had compensated by ensuring he took up space deliberately. He was wearing a suit at 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon because Victor always wore a suit, because the suit was part of the posture, part of the communication. He turned from the window when Damon entered. He did not look surprised to see him, which he wouldn't because he'd sent the message. "You drove yourself," Victor said. "You noticed. I noticed you left the city at 6 this morning and spent the better part of the day in a coastal town in Maine before coming here." Victor moved to the desk and sat behind it with the ease of someone occupying his natural position. "Sit down." Damon did not sit down. He moved to the center of the room and stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at his uncle across the mahogany desk and the 40 years of accumulated dynamic between them. "Tell me what you know," Damon said. "About Maine?" "About everything." Victor looked at him for a moment. He had the family eyes, though his were darker, more gray-brown than true gray. He had the family habit of measuring silences for information before filling them. "I know you found the woman," Victor said. "Claire Rowan. I know you conducted a DNA test without going through the organization's resources, which was either careful or naive depending on how you look at it." He picked up a pen from the desk and set it down again, a small fidgeting movement so unlike Victor that Damon noted it. "I know the test confirmed a biological relationship." "You knew about the boy before I did," Damon said. Victor did not deny this. "How long?" Damon said. 14 months. The number landed the same way it had when Reyes had said it, with the specific weight of time that could have been used differently. "You had 14 months, Damon said, and you said nothing." "I was assessing the situation." "For 14 months. These things require Say the next word carefully," Damon said. His voice was very quiet. The quieter his voice got, the more dangerous the room became, and Victor had known him long enough to know this, and Damon watched his uncle register it and make a decision about how to proceed. I was protecting the organization, Victor said, from an 8-year-old. From the disruption. Victor's voice was measured, but there was something underneath it, a tension in the set of his shoulders that Damon was cataloging as the conversation moved. An heir changes succession. Succession changes power distribution. Power distribution changes. I know what it changes. Do you? Victor set his hands flat on the desk. You have run this organization for 6 years with complete authority, no checks, no competing claims, no one positioned to challenge the decisions you make or the direction you take. You've been effective, I won't argue that, but effectiveness without oversight is its own kind of corruption, and an heir— Stop, Damon said. Victor stopped. You're not talking about oversight, Damon said. You're talking about the advisory role. You're talking about the fact that a legitimate blood heir changes the calculus of succession in a way that removes the position you've been building toward for 6 years. He watched his uncle's face. Dad's will gave you an advisory role. You've been operating as something considerably more than advisory since the funeral. An heir with direct blood claim ends that ambiguity permanently. He paused. That's what you were assessing, not the disruption, your own position. The room was very still. Outside, through the window at Victor's back, the service road was gray and empty. You intercepted the lab report, Damon said. I was protecting— You forged it. He said it cleanly, without heat. You forged a DNA report to erase my son from my awareness, not from the organization's risk calculus, from my awareness. He moved one step closer to the desk. That's not organizational management, Victor. That's personal. That's targeted and personal, and it has a name that isn't oversight. Victor stood up. He did this slowly, with deliberate control, and he met Damon's gaze across the desk with an expression Damon had not seen on his uncle's face before, which was the expression of a man who has decided that the conversation he'd hoped to have was not the one that was happening and who was moving to the contingency. There are things you don't know, Victor said. Then tell me. Things about the organization's current structure that you don't know because I've been managing them in parallel while you've been focused on day-to-day operations. He paused. 6 years of management decisions. 6 years of arrangement. The organization that exists right now is not purely what your father built. It is partially what I rebuilt after the succession war, and the architecture of that rebuild has dependencies that a sudden shift in succession would destabilize severely. Damon looked at him. He let the words sit for a moment, and then he said, You've been running a parallel enterprise. Victor said nothing. Inside the organization, for how long? Damon, how long, Victor? The silence ran for 5 seconds, which in this room was a considerable silence. 4 years, Victor said. Something cold moved through Damon's chest and settled. 4 years. He thought about the server logs Reyes had pulled, the 3 access anomalies, and he understood now that what Reyes had found was not the infrastructure itself, but a single recent operation, the tip of something much larger that had been running underneath him for 4 years while he ran what he believed was his organization. What kind of parallel enterprise? Damon said. His voice was extremely flat now. The kind that is profitable and discreet and that has kept certain external relationships stable that your philosophy of operation would not have maintained. Say what it is. Trafficking, Victor said, and then, in the same tone, with the same deliberate control, as if the word weighed nothing. Primarily contraband. Some human cargo, Eastern European routes, nothing that touches domestic soil. Damon did not move. He stood in the center of the room, and he felt the architecture of what he'd believed he was running shift beneath him like a floor that had been hollow for years, and he was only now putting weight on the right spot to find it. Human cargo, he said. It is handled through a separate network. Your name is not associated with human cargo. He said it again, not as a question. As a fact, he was pressing into the room between them to make sure it was real, because sometimes you needed to say a thing more than once to accept that you were in the world where it was true. Victor's jaw was set. It is a contained operation. It does not intersect with— It intersects with everything, Damon said. It intersects with my name and my family and the organization I have been running, which I have been running without knowing that underneath it you have been." He stopped. He breathed. He put his hands out of his pockets and at his sides, and he consciously, deliberately, kept them still. 4 years. It was necessary. The Eastern European partnerships would not have held without. "I don't want to hear about the partnerships." He looked at his uncle. "I want to understand something. You found out about my son 14 months ago. You intercepted the DNA report. You put men in that town to watch a woman and a child. And underneath all of that, you have been running a trafficking network for 4 years inside an organization that carries my name." He paused. "Tell me the part where I'm wrong." Victor looked at him for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had lost the measured quality. What was underneath it was not shame. It was something else. "You were never built for the full scope of this," Victor said. "Your father knew it. He structured the will the way he did because he knew you would run the operational core effectively, but that you lacked the appetite for the decisions that kept the larger architecture viable. I filled that role. I have been filling that role. The organization is larger and more stable than it was when your father died precisely because I have been willing to make decisions you would not have sanctioned." "And the boy," Damon said, "where does he fit in the appetite calculus?" "An heir creates legitimacy claims that complicate everything I've described." Victor's voice was direct now, the management language stripped away. "A blood heir with documentation changes the succession structure in ways that remove my operational capacity entirely. I could not allow that to happen without understanding the full implications." "You could not allow," Damon said. "Damon, the men in the motel, in Harlow Cove." He watched his uncle's face. "What are their instructions?" Victor said nothing. "Victor, quiet, absolute." "What are their instructions?" "Contingency," Victor said. "Nothing has been activated. They are there as a contingency in the event that the situation became." "What is the contingency?" Victor looked at him across the desk and the portrait and the 40 years, and in his face Damon saw the thing he had not let himself see walking in, the thing that had been available to be seen for a long time by anyone willing to look at it. "The boy," Damon said. He said it very quietly. "The contingency involves the boy." Victor did not deny it. The room contracted. Everything in Damon's field of vision sharpened and reduced to the single specific focal point of the man behind the desk. And what moved through him was not anger in the conventional sense. Anger had heat, had expansion, had a quality of lashing outward, but something more like the sensation of every non-essential thing in his body going offline simultaneously so that what remained was purely, mechanically operational. He moved around the desk in 4 steps. Victor pushed back from the chair, and his hand went toward the right-hand drawer, and Damon had the drawer closed on his uncle's wrist before the drawer was fully open, the edge of the mahogany coming down on bone with a sound that was not pleasant, and Victor made a short, sharp sound and pulled his hand back. "Don't," Damon said. Victor was breathing hard. His face had gone white around the mouth. He held his wrist against his chest and looked at Damon with an expression that had finally shed all of its layers and showed what was underneath, which was an old man who had made a very long series of decisions that had each seemed reasonable in isolation and had arrived at a place that was not. "Call them off," Damon said. "If I call them off, now, in front of me." He picked the phone up from the desk and held it out. "You call your men in Maine, and you tell them to stand down and leave the town. You do this right now." Victor looked at the phone. He looked at Damon. He was calculating. Damon could see it, the precise operational calculus of a man who had been calculating for 40 years. And Damon watched him calculate and knew what he was going to find at the end of it, which was that the calculation didn't work anymore. Victor took the phone. He made the call. It was short. The instruction was given. He set the phone back on the desk. "They'll want confirmation," Damon said. "A second contact, whatever your verification protocol is." Victor sent a text from the same phone. Damon watched the screen. Then Damon picked up his own phone and called Reyes. "Maine," he said. "Confirm that the 2 subjects are moving." Reyes was quiet for 40 seconds. Then, "The motel subject checked out 12 minutes ago. The marine supply subject's vehicle is gone. I'm confirming through our team on the ground. Another pause. Confirmed. Both are clear of the perimeter. Damon ended the call. He looked at his uncle. The parallel operation, Damon said. The trafficking network, every name, every route, every financial account associated with it. I want it on a physical document on this desk by morning. If I give you that, you're going to give it to me, or I'm going to spend the next 6 months finding every piece of it myself. And the difference between those two outcomes is whether your name is on the documentation I eventually hand to federal investigators, or whether it stays private. He held his uncle's gaze. This is not negotiable. Victor looked at him for a long time. You would burn your own organization. It's not my organization if it contains what you just described. He picked up his coat from where he'd set it over the chair back when he'd moved around the desk. I'll be at the guest house tonight. Morning, Victor. He left the study. He walked down the corridor and out through the main entrance into the cold Connecticut afternoon, and he stood on the gravel drive and put his coat on, and he thought about a DNA report and a forged substitute and men in a motel and a trafficking network running 4 years underneath his name, and he thought about a boy on a step stool, and he did something he almost never did, which was feel the full unfiltered weight of all of it simultaneously without filing anything away. It lasted approximately 15 seconds. Then his phone rang. It was a Harlow Cove area code, not a number he recognized. Yes, he said. The voice on the other end was Claire's. Her voice was doing the thing voices did when the person speaking them had been recently frightened and was managing it very hard. There are men outside my building, she said. 2 of them. They've been on the street since this morning, and one of them followed Noah home from Ms. Delacroix, and I don't know who they are, and I don't know why you were here today, and I don't know if these 2 things are connected, but they feel connected, and I need you to tell me right now if they are. Damon closed his eyes. He opened them. Victor had made the calls. Reyes had confirmed both subjects were clear of the perimeter, which meant the men Claire was describing were not the men from the motel and the marine supply store. There were others. Victor had a contingency, and the contingency had more than 2 points. Listen to me, Damon said. He was already moving toward his car. Are you and Noah inside the building right now? Yes, I locked the front. Don't open it. Don't open either door until I tell you to. Do you have a back room with no windows? The pantry, it's... Go there. Take Noah. Don't explain. Just take him. Do it now while we're talking. He got in the car and started the engine. Are you moving? He heard her moving. He heard a door, then Noah's voice asking something, then Claire's voice saying something short and quiet and firm. We're in the pantry, she said. Good. Stay on the phone. He was already on the highway heading north, driving at a speed that was going to attract attention and calculating whether that was a problem he could manage. He called Reyes on the car's system while keeping Claire on his cell. The contingency is bigger than 2 men, he said to Reyes. There are others at the bakery. Victor made the first call in front of me, but he has a secondary network. I need our team inside the perimeter in the next 15 minutes. We have 2 men 4 blocks out, Reyes said. I'm moving them now. And I need everything you can pull on Victor's secondary contacts in the next 30 minutes. Not the primary network, the one he uses when he doesn't want the primary network to know. I'll start pulling. He took the car to 95 on a straightaway, into the cell. Claire, I'm here. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without... Just tell me. The men outside your building are connected to something I'm responsible for. Not directly, but... He stopped. There was no version of this sentence that didn't sound like what it was. The person who sent them is my uncle. He knows about Noah. He's been watching your building for reasons that are about me and about the organization I run and about a succession structure that Noah's existence disrupts. He breathed. I'm responsible for this situation being in your life. I know that. I'm going to tell you everything you asked to hear and more. But right now I need you to stay in that room. The silence on Claire's end lasted 4 seconds. He counted them. What kind of organization? She said. The kind you're going to have a great deal of feelings about. Damon. Criminal, he said. I run a criminal organization. It is... There are things I need to tell you that are going to be hard to hear, and I am going to tell you all of them, but I need you and Noah to be safe first." Another silence, shorter. "How far away are you?" she said. 2 hours. "There are 2 of them on the front street and I think 1 more in the alley. I heard something 20 minutes ago." 3. Victor had put 3 men on the building. Reyes had 2 4 blocks out. The arithmetic was close enough to be manageable if the situation stayed passive, but passive situations had a way of changing their character once the people running them understood that their window was closing. "My people will be there before anything moves," Damon said. He said it with the certainty he reserved for things he could not afford to be uncertain about. "You will hear from a man named Reyes in the next 10 minutes. He's going to tell you a code word. The code word is going to be the name of a tree. When he tells you that word, you can open the pantry door." "A tree? Yes?" "Okay." She paused. "Noah's asking me why we're sitting in the dark." "What did you tell him?" "I told him we're playing a game." A beat. "He says games are supposed to have rules." Damon looked at the highway ahead. He thought about a boy in an apron explaining the curved knife. He thought about an 8-year-old in a dark pantry believing his mother when she said it was a game. The simple, absolute trust of that. The thing you had to have done right for years to earn it. "He's right," Damon said. He drove. He was 40 miles north of the Connecticut estate, making time, when Reyes called back. "Our team is inside the perimeter," Reyes said. "I identified 3 subjects on the building. 2 front, 1 rear alley." He paused. "We have a problem." "Tell me." "The rear subject has moved. He's no longer in the alley. I have him rounding the north corner of the building toward the front entrance." Another pause. "He's carrying." Damon's hands tightened on the wheel. "Contact?" "Non-violent so far. He's positioned at the front window, looking in." "Where's our team?" "Closing, 90 seconds. Into the cell." "Claire, is the front door locked and bolted?" "Locked. I don't have a bolt." "Is there anything, a chair, a heavy counter, anything that can brace against the handle?" Shuffling sounds. Then, "The shelving unit. I can pull it over." "Do it fast." He heard her moving, heard the effort of it, heard something heavy grinding against a floor. He heard Noah's voice, higher now, not quite alarmed but reading the room the way kids read rooms when adults stopped pretending. "Mom," Noah's voice. "Mom, what's happening?" "It's okay." Claire breathing hard from the exertion. "Hey, look at me. It's okay." "Who is that on the phone?" Damon heard this. He heard Claire hesitate for half a second. "Someone helping us," she said. Reyes came back. "Our team is on the front subjects. Stand." A sharp sound that was not static. Then 2 more. Then Reyes's voice, clipped and operational. "Shots fired. North side of the building. 1 subject down, ours. 2 of Victor's men running east. 3rd subject." "The 3rd? "He's through the front window," Reyes said. "Sir, he's inside the building." Everything in Damon went cold and very fast. "Claire," he said. "He's inside, right now. Do not come out of that room. Whatever you hear, do not open that door." "Damon, do you hear me? Do not open the door." A sound from somewhere deeper in the building. Not the pantry, somewhere up front, something being moved or knocked over. Then footsteps. Claire's breathing on the phone was shallow and fast. He heard Noah make a sound. Not words, just a small involuntary sound. The sound of a child who has understood that this is not a game and is very afraid and is trying not to show it. The footsteps got closer. Damon was doing 105 on a main highway, and he was 90 minutes away, and Reyes had 1 man down and 2 subjects at large, and 1 inside the building, and the floor of the pantry where his son was sitting was the only thing between what was walking toward that door and everything that mattered. He pressed the accelerator to the floor. "Claire," he said. His voice was the steadiest it had been all day, steadier than the study, steadier than the conversation about the word trafficking, steadier than all of it, because this was the moment where steadiness was not optional, where it was the only resource available. "I need you to listen very carefully, because there is something in that room you can use, and we have maybe 30 seconds to find it before that door opens." The shelving unit, Damon said. Is there anything on it you can use as a weapon? Claire's breathing was fast and shallow. He heard her moving in the dark, heard small sounds of hands moving across surfaces. A jar. Heavy glass. Take it and get behind Noah. Put yourself between him and the door. I'm already... The footsteps outside the pantry stopped. The door handle moved. Damon heard it through the phone, a small metallic sound, the handle depressing, finding resistance from whatever Claire had braced against it. A pause, then a harder push. The sound of something scraping against the floor, the shelving unit giving an inch against pressure from the other side. Reyes, Damon said into the car's system. Where is your team? Building now. North entry. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. The pantry door took another hit, heavier this time, a shoulder or a boot, and Claire made a sound that was not quite a cry. It was the sound a person made when they were bracing against something with everything they had and still felt it moving. Noah made no sound at all, which was somehow worse. Hold it, Damon said. Claire, hold the door. I am holding it. A crash from somewhere else in the building. Voices, 2 of them, not quiet. Then a sound that was footsteps moving fast, and a second impact against the pantry door. And this time the scraping was longer, the shelving unit giving 2 inches, 3, and Claire's breath came out in a sharp burst. Then a different sound, a door hitting a wall, footsteps on tile moving at speed, a very short sequence of sounds that were not verbal and did not require narration and lasted under 8 seconds. Silence. Clear, said a voice on the other side of the pantry door. Male, flat, professional. Miss Rowan? My name is Garrett. I'm with Reyes. The code word is Birch. Claire did not move for 2 full seconds. Birch, the voice repeated. Damon heard the shelving unit scrape back. He heard the door open. He heard Noah exhale, a long, slow breath, the specific sound of a child letting go of something he'd been holding very tightly for several minutes. You okay? Garrett said. Not to Claire. To Noah. A pause. Then Noah's voice, careful and assessing. Yeah. Good kid, Garrett said. Damon let out a breath he had been holding since somewhere on the Connecticut highway. He was still doing 95. He brought it down to 80. Reyes, he said. Both subjects on the ground, 1 detained, 1 won't be a problem. A pause. Garrett has the building. I have 4 more moving into the perimeter now. The one who's detained, I want him available for a conversation. Understood. Into the cell. Claire? A moment. Yeah. Her voice was different now. The controlled layer was gone, stripped off by adrenaline and aftermath, and what was left was raw and unsteady in a way that was not weakness, but simple human aftermath. You did well, he said. Don't. A breath. Don't manage me right now. I can't take that right now. Okay. Noah is... He's fine. He's standing here asking Garrett what kind of gun that is. What did Garrett say? He said it's a Springfield and Noah should not touch it. A pause that had something almost broken at the edge of it. He said okay, and now he's asking what caliber. Damon looked at the road. He's curious about everything. He's always been like that. Her voice caught once, quickly, and she controlled it. I'm going to need you to tell me everything, all of it, tonight. I'll be there in 70 minutes. She ended the call. He drove north into the darkening afternoon with the weight of what had just happened settling around him. And what settled heaviest was not the tactical situation, the detained man, the subjects in flight, the secondary network he hadn't known existed, the conversation with Victor that still had hours of implication left to process, but the sound of Noah exhaling in that pantry, that specific sound, the sound of his son releasing fear in a dark room because a stranger with a gun had said a tree's name, because Damon had thought to build that contingency into a situation that Damon himself had created. He had brought this to their door. That was the truth that sat underneath everything else. The structural truth that no amount of Victor's culpability or organizational complexity could dissolve. He drove faster. He arrived at 6:47 in the evening. The bakery's front window was cracked from where the third subject had come through it, a long diagonal fracture in the lower pane that someone had taped with packing tape on the inside. Garrett had positioned 2 men at street level and 1 in the building across the alley. The block looked ordinary to anyone who didn't know what ordinary looked like when it was being maintained by people who were very good at their jobs. Damon went in through the back. Claire was at the work island in the kitchen. The overhead light was on and the oven was off, and the room smelled like the tail end of the day's work, flour and cooled metal, and the faint sweetness of something that had been baked hours ago. She had a mug of something in both hands, and she was looking at the surface of the island when he came in, and she looked up when she heard the door. She looked at him for a moment. She did not say anything. Noah was not in the kitchen. Damon registered this and read it correctly. She had put him somewhere else, the living space above the bakery, presumably, somewhere away from this conversation. "Sit down," Claire said. He sat on the stool across the island from her. He put his hands flat on the surface. He looked at her. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her from the beginning, from the Succession War 9 years ago, from the borrowed name and the 6 weeks in Gloucester and the 2 hours in which he had packed and disappeared, from the attempts to reach her afterward, and the dead number and the address that had been a rental. He told her what the organization was, the full shape of it, not the sanitized version, the criminal enterprise with its territories and its history, and the things he had authorized over the years and the things he had not authorized and had run beneath him for 4 years without his knowledge. He told her about Victor and the forged report and the men in the motel and the parallel trafficking network. He told her all of it. It took 40 minutes. He did not dress any of it up. When he said things that were hard to say, he said them in plain language, and he watched her face, and he did not look away from what he saw there, which was a sequence of things. Shock, anger, a specific kind of grief, more anger, and underneath all of it, something exhausted and terribly honest. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The trafficking," she said. "Women. Primarily." She set the mug down. She put her hands on the island. She looked at them. "And you didn't know?" "I didn't know. That is the truth, and I understand if it doesn't feel like enough." "It doesn't feel like enough." She looked up. "But I believe you." She paused. "I believe you because if you'd known, you wouldn't be sitting here. You would have handled it, whatever that means in your world." A pause. "That's not a compliment." "I know. What happens to Victor?" "The documentation I'm requiring from him goes to federal investigators. The trafficking network gets dismantled. He faces the legal consequences of what he built." He held her gaze. "The rest of the organization, the legitimate holdings, the businesses that exist on the surface, I'm going to restructure. I've been thinking about this for the last 3 hours on the highway, and I've been thinking about how to—" He stopped. "That's not the conversation for tonight." "No," she said. "Tonight the conversation is about Noah." "Yes." She was quiet again. The kitchen was very still. From somewhere above them, through the ceiling, came the faint muffled sound of a television. Something with a lot of sound effects, something animated, the periodic bright percussion of a cartoon. "He's going to want to know you," Claire said. "That's just who he is. He will want to know you completely and quickly and without reservation, because he doesn't have a protective instinct about people yet. He hasn't needed one, because I've kept his world small enough that everyone in it was safe." She looked at Damon. "You are not safe." "I know. You are the least safe person who has ever been in proximity to my son." "I know that too. So tell me why I should let him near you." Damon looked at his hands on the island. He thought about the correct answer, the tactical answer, the one that addressed her stated concern in the most persuasive available terms. Then he thought about the pantry and the sound of Noah's exhale. "You probably shouldn't," he said, "by any rational measure." He looked up. "But I'm going to ask you to anyway, and I'm going to spend however long it takes earning the answer." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then the interior door at the back of the kitchen opened, and Noah stood in it in socked feet and a shirt that had something drawn on it in what appeared to be marker, looking between the two of them with the gray-eyed assessment that Damon now recognized in a way that was almost physically uncomfortable. "The cartoon was boring," Noah said. "Noah, I know. He came to the island and climbed onto the stool at the end, pulling his knees up, wrapping his arms around them. He looked at Damon with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who had been in a dark pantry less than 2 hours ago and appeared to have processed this and moved past it in the specific elastic way of 8-year-olds who had not yet learned to carry things. "You're the one from the phone." "Yes, Sakers," Damon said. "Garrett said you told him the code word." "I told him what word to use, yes." Noah considered this. "Why a tree?" "I needed something you'd both remember and neither of you would say by accident." Another consideration, longer. "That's smart," Noah said. "Thank you." Noah looked at his mother. He looked at Damon. He looked at the space between them with the perceptiveness of a child who had spent 8 years as the only other person in a 2-person household and had therefore developed a finely calibrated instrument for reading adult emotional weather. "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" he said to Damon. Claire made a small movement. Damon felt it more than saw it. "Yes," Damon said. "If your mother says it's all right." Noah looked at Claire. Claire looked at Damon. Something passed between the adults that Noah did not have the full vocabulary for yet, which was perhaps the first mercy the evening had produced. "Fine," Claire said. Her voice was quiet and complicated. Noah nodded, satisfied in the way children were satisfied when the world confirmed what they had decided, and he got off the stool and went back through the interior door. His socked feet were silent on the stairs going up. Damon looked at the door for a moment after it closed. "Don't read into that," Claire said. "I'm not." He does that with everyone. He doesn't have the sense that other people's presence is conditional. He's never had a reason to develop it. She picked up the mug again. "I'm telling you that so you understand what it will cost him if you make decisions that take you away from here." Damon held her gaze. "I understand." She nodded once, tight and exhausted, and not yet anything close to resolved. "Go. Come back at 7, like we agreed." He went. He did not sleep. He spent the night in the car, parked 2 blocks from the bakery within Garrett's perimeter, working the phone. He called Reyes at 11 and again at 2 and again at 4:30. He called Adler and had her begin building a documentation package on Victor's trafficking network from the materials she'd already gathered in the course of the original DNA investigation. He called the attorney who handled the organization's legitimate corporate holdings and told him to begin a structural audit of every entity in the portfolio, which was going to take months, and was going to find things that were unpleasant, and he said to do it anyway. At 5 in the morning, Reyes called him. "The detained subject gave us names," Reyes said. 6 men total in Victor's private detail. We have confirmed locations on 3 of them. The other 3 went dark after last night. Dark means mobile. Yes. Victor's status. He left the estate at 11 last night. We lost him at the Connecticut border. A pause. He has a secondary property in Rhode Island registered under a corporate name. I'm pulling the address now. "He's not in Rhode Island," Damon said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. "No?" "He's moving toward the problem. That's what he does. He doesn't retreat to a safe location. He moves to the operational point." Damon looked at the bakery through the windshield, the dark building, the fogged lower edge of the front window, the crack in the pane still taped from the inside. "He's coming here. To Harlow Cove. To end this cleanly before the documentation reaches anyone." He sat up straighter. "Get our full team in. Everyone. I want this perimeter hard by 6 a.m. "And you?" "I'm already here." He ended the call and got out of the car into the cold 5 o'clock dark and stood on the empty street and looked at the town around him. The quiet storefronts, the harbor smell, the gulls beginning their early rounds above the water. And he thought about a man he had known his entire life sitting across a mahogany desk, and about all the years in which the thing that had been true had been visible and he had declined to see it, because seeing it required a response, and the response required a sacrifice he had not been ready to make. He was ready now. The being ready had arrived not as a decision but as a physical fact, something that had happened in a pantry through a phone line while he drove north at 105 miles an hour. He checked his watch. An hour and 15 minutes to 7 o'clock. He walked the perimeter of the bakery block once in the cold and the dark, hands in his pockets, and he let himself feel something that was not tactical, which was the specific quality of standing outside a building that contained his son, and how that felt, and what it meant that a thing he had not known about 4 days ago had become in 4 days the organizing principle of everything he was prepared to do. At 5:50, he posted himself at the back entrance and called Reyes. Any movement? Nothing yet. But Damon, Reyes paused, which he almost never did. The waterfront. There's an abandoned shipping terminal at the south end of the harbor. Victor's corporate portfolio includes a holding company that was associated with that property 8 years ago. The holding company was dissolved, but the property access codes may not have been changed. Damon turned and looked south along the harbor. The terminal was visible from here, a dark industrial bulk against the gray pre-dawn sky. A warehouse structure and 2 loading docks extending over the water, everything dark, everything still. He's already in town, Damon said. That's my read. He's staging from the terminal. If he came in by water, he came in by water. Damon was already moving south along the harbor road. Get 2 of your men to the terminal's north access point. Do not approach until I'm there. And Garrett stays on the bakery. Garrett does not move from the bakery regardless of what happens at the terminal. Understood. A pause. You're going in direct. I'm going in direct. That's Reyes. Yes, sir. Victor knows everything I know about tactical positioning, fallback options, and how we respond to threats because he was in the room when those protocols were built. Standard approach doesn't work here. A silence. Right. I'll have my phone live. If you lose signal, wait 4 minutes, then bring everyone. He moved along the harbor road in the pre-dawn dark at a pace that was not quite running, the cold air coming off the water, his breath visible in the gray light beginning to separate sky from sea at the eastern edge. The shipping terminal's perimeter fence had a gate that had been secured with a chain and padlock. The chain had been cut. Recently, the metal was bright at the cut point. No rust. He went through. The terminal's main warehouse was a structure of corrugated steel and exposed framing, approximately 60 feet wide and 120 deep, with 2 large bay doors on the landward side and a loading dock extending over the water at the far end. The roof was partially compromised. Sections of the corrugated steel had given way over years of salt air and neglect, and through these gaps the early morning sky was visible in long gray strips. It smelled like rust and old diesel and standing water. He went in through a personnel door at the north side. The interior was a large open space with rusted equipment pushed to the walls, a forklift with flat tires, stacked crating, the remains of a sorting operation that had been abandoned mid-process and left to corrode. Water stood in shallow pools on the concrete floor. The loading dock at the far end was open to the harbor, the dock doors rolled up, the gray water visible beyond, a small motorboat tied to one of the dock cleats. Victor had come by water, just as Damon had said. Victor was standing at the far end near the dock doors. He was not alone. 2 men flanked him, both dressed in dark tactical clothing, both oriented toward the entrance where Damon had come in, which meant they had been watching the door, which meant they had heard him coming. There was a third position. Damon identified it from the shadow and the specific quality of someone trying very hard to be still in the overhead framework of the structure, above and to the right. Damon stopped 20 feet inside the door. You walked in alone, Victor said. His voice echoed slightly in the space. He was dressed as he'd been at the estate, suit and coat, which was either composure or habit, and was possibly both. Yes. That's not like you. Things are different now. Victor looked at him across the industrial space, across the rust in the water and the gray morning light coming through the gaps in the roof. He looked tired in a way the estate meeting had not shown, a bone-deep tiredness that lived behind the eyes. The documentation, Victor said. Did you actually send it, or are you still building it? Still building. You have a window to walk away from this if you want to use it. Walk away to what? Not bitterness, just a plain question. To the legal process, which is survivable. People survive federal investigations with competent legal representation and a cooperation framework. You'd let me cooperate. I'd let you cooperate. Victor was quiet for a moment. One of the flanking men shifted his weight, and Victor made a small gesture with two fingers, and the man was still again. The boy, Victor said. What's your intention? He's my son. You know what my intention is. He's a liability. He's my son, Damon said again. Flat, final. In your world, a son is a target. You know this. You have always known this. A blood heir in the Voss structure is a focal point for every competitor and adversary the organization has ever... I'm changing the structure. Victor looked at him. I told you last night. I'm restructuring the legitimate holdings. The rest gets handed to federal investigators along with your documentation. I'm done with the rest. He held his uncle's gaze. There won't be a structure for Noah to be a target inside. Victor was quiet for a long time. The water lapped at the dock. A gull passed the open dock doors, its cry brief and sharp and gone. You'd burn it all, Victor said. Everything your father built. Dad built a criminal enterprise. I've been running a criminal enterprise. A boy in a bakery showed me what that means when it catches up with the people who don't choose it. Damon didn't move. It's done, Victor. The question is whether you walk away from it standing up. Victor looked at him. He looked at him for a long time with the gray-brown eyes and the set jaw and the 40 years of shared family history, and Damon looked back and felt none of the things he might have expected to feel. Grief, hesitation, the pull of blood obligation, because those things had been burned off somewhere on a main highway while his son sat in a dark pantry. Victor made a small sound that was not quite a word. Then he looked at the man on his right and nodded once. The man moved. He moved fast and sideways toward a bank of rusted shelving along the east wall, getting out of the direct line and reaching for the weapon at his hip. And the man in the overhead framework shifted, and the second flanking man came forward, and Damon moved left with the same instinct that had kept him operational through a succession war and 6 years of organizational leadership. Not toward cover, because cover was the wrong play in a space this open, but toward the nearest structural column, the heavy steel support 8 feet to his left, getting it between himself and the overhead position. The man from the framework dropped to the catwalk railing and fired once. The shot hit the concrete 4 feet from Damon and threw chips. Damon was already behind the column. He had one weapon. He had not come to the terminal expecting a clean conversation, but he had come with only one weapon because the alternative was arriving in full tactical configuration, which would have told Victor everything about Damon's intentions before the first word. He had traded advantage for the chance at a conversation that would not require this. The conversation had not worked. He was in the accounting phase now. He calculated from behind the column. 3 men, armed, 1 elevated. Victor had moved back toward the dock when the engagement started, which was correct behavior for a principal and which put him near the boat. If Victor reached the boat, the waterfront chase was a different problem entirely, less controlled, and the documentation Damon needed was on Victor's physical person, a drive on a chain around his neck, old-fashioned, the way their father had done things, the chain visible above the shirt collar at the estate meeting. He needed Victor close. He needed the elevated man down. He needed at least one of the flanking men occupied with something other than Damon. Outside, through the gaps in the roof, the sky was lightning fast. At 6:43, his phone registered a text from Reyes that was one word: ready. Damon looked at the personnel door he'd come in through. He looked at the bay doors on the west side of the building, large roll-up doors used for vehicle access, currently closed but not locked. He'd checked them in the 40 seconds he'd had before positioning. He texted Reyes one word back: west. 12 seconds later, the west bay doors came up with a sound like a thunderclap in the corrugated steel space, both of them simultaneously, morning light flooding in, and 2 of Reyes's men came through at a low run with the specific practiced economy of people who knew how to enter a space. The elevated man swung toward the west doors. Damon came out from behind the column. He was across 20 feet of open floor before the near-flanking man had fully registered the movement, and he hit him at full speed and they went into the rusted shelving together, the metal edge catching the man across the shoulder blade, and the man's weapon hit the concrete floor and slid, and Damon had his arm up and back before the man could recover his footing. The second flanking man came in from the right. Damon pivoted without releasing the first man, using him as the anchor, and took the second man's forearm on his shoulder instead of his face, which was where it was aimed, and the impact was significant. He felt it in the joint, but he kept his feet and drove the first man into the second man, and the two of them went down together into the standing water and the rust. He was on his feet and moving toward the dock in the same sequence. Victor had the boat's mooring line in his hands. "Victor?" Damon said. He was breathing hard. His shoulder was wrong in a way he was not going to address right now. Victor looked at him. The two tactical men from Reyes were engaged with the elevated shooter in the framework above. The two flanking men were down. The space between Damon and his uncle was 20 feet of dock and gray morning light. Victor dropped the mooring line. He looked at Damon and he looked at the chain around his neck, the drive on the chain, which he reached up and removed with a deliberate movement and held in his closed fist. "You'll dismantle all of it," Victor said. "Every piece. The work of 30 years. "Yes." Victor opened his hand. The drive sat in his palm. He looked at it for a moment in the way a person looked at an object that had cost a great deal and was about to cost more. He held it out. Damon crossed the dock and took it. Victor looked at him once more with the tired eyes and the family jaw, and then he sat down on the dock's edge with his feet hanging over the gray harbor water, and he looked at the water and said nothing. Above them, in the framework, the sounds of the engagement had stopped. Reyes's voice came from the direction of the west doors. "Clear!" Damon closed his hand around the drive. He looked at Victor sitting on the dock's edge with the collapsed posture of a man at the end of a very long, sustained effort. And he thought about a portrait in a study and a mahogany desk and 40 years of a relationship that had contained running alongside everything else, this. His shoulder was wrong. He could feel it now that the movement had stopped. Something pulled or torn, not structural, but it would be significant in the morning. He was going to be late for 7 o'clock. He texted Reyes, "Wrap it. I need to move." Then he walked out of the terminal the way he had come in, through the north personnel door, into the morning air and the harbor smell, the sun fully up now over the water, and he walked north along the harbor road toward a green-painted bakery sign and the sound of an oven coming to heat, and a boy who would be asking questions with the easy, unhurried curiosity of someone who had not yet learned that most answers were complicated. He was going to be 4 minutes late. He walked faster. He thought, "She said 7. He thought, "Don't be late." His shoulder sent a long, bright line of pain down his arm with every stride, and he did not slow down and he did not stop, because the terminal was behind him and the bakery was ahead, and the distance between the two was the only geography that mattered now, and he was going to cover every inch of it. He turned the corner onto the bakery street. The green sign was visible. The window light was on. Through the glass, he could see the orange glow of the oven at the back of the kitchen, and the silhouette of someone at the counter, and smaller beside the counter, the silhouette of a figure on a step stool with both arms moving in the deliberate, focused way of someone working at something that required full attention and did not allow for distraction. Damon stopped on the sidewalk outside the bakery. He stood there for a moment in the cold morning air, his breath visible, his shoulder burning, the drive from Victor's chain closed in his fist. He looked through the glass at his son on the step stool. Noah was scoring dough. The curved knife, the one Claire had said was the only one he was allowed to use. He was bent over the work surface with the focused economy of a child who had been shown something once and remembered it completely, and his lips were moving slightly, which meant he was counting, or talking to himself, or doing the private narration that some children did when they were fully absorbed. Claire was at the far end of the counter. She had not seen Damon yet. She was watching Noah with an expression that was not quite a smile. It was something quieter than that, something that had been earned over 8 years of mornings exactly like this one, the specific unguarded look of a person watching something they built become itself. Damon stood outside the glass and looked at the two of them in the oven light. His shoulder was wrong and his hands were scraped from the shelving, and somewhere behind him on the harbor road, a federal case was beginning its slow, necessary machinery, and the organization that had carried his name for 6 years was at the start of its long unwinding, and all of that was true and all of that was real, and all of it was also, in this specific moment, secondary. He pushed the door open. The bell above it rang once. Claire looked up. Noah looked up. "You're late," Noah said. He said it without accusation, just as a fact he had registered. 4 minutes, Damon said. Mom said 7. I know. He came to the counter. He looked at the scoring on the loaf in front of Noah. Clean diagonal cuts, evenly spaced, the curved knife set to the side where it wouldn't roll. That's good work. Noah looked at it critically. The third one went a little deep. It'll still bake, right? Noah considered this. Yeah, he said. Probably. Claire was looking at Damon's shoulder, at the way he was holding it, at the state of his hands. She looked at his face, and he looked back at her, and something moved between them that was not yet resolution and not yet forgiveness, and was not required to be either of those things this morning. Coffee's on, she said. Thank you. He sat down on the stool at the end of the island. Noah climbed off the step stool and repositioned it with the careful deliberateness of someone returning a tool to its correct place, and then he climbed back up beside Damon and picked up the curved knife and looked at the next loaf. Watch, Noah said. Not performing, just sharing. Damon watched. The coffee was dark and strong, and Claire put it in front of him without asking how he took it, which meant she remembered, which meant some things survived 9 years intact whether you wanted them to or not. Damon drank it and watched Noah work and said nothing for a while, and the silence in the bakery kitchen was the specific kind of silence that existed not because there was nothing to say, but because what needed to be said was waiting for the right moment, and the moment had not yet arrived, and everyone in the room understood this without discussing it. Noah finished scoring the second loaf. He examined it with the critical eye of someone who had a standard and was measuring the work against it. Then he climbed off the step stool and carried both loaves to the oven with the careful, deliberate balance Damon had watched through the window on his first morning in Harlow Cove. The same posture, the same focused economy, the tray held level, and the face set with concentration. He slid the tray in. He closed the oven door. He set the timer on the counter beside it. A physical timer, a round dial, the old kind, and he twisted it with both hands to the right number. 22 minutes, Noah said. He turned around and looked at Damon. You want to know why 22 and not 20? Tell me. Because this oven runs 2 degrees hot, and Mom figured that out in the first year, but never got it fixed because the repair guy wanted $400, and we had a broken step on the back stairs that cost $350, so she did the stairs first. He said this as a complete and factual account of a resource allocation decision. If you bake at 20, the bottom crust gets too dark. Damon looked at Claire. Claire was looking at her mug. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. How long have you known about the oven? Damon said to Noah. Since I was 6. Noah climbed back onto the step stool at the island and picked up a spare piece of dough and began pressing it between his palms the way children handled materials that were interesting to touch. Mom showed me. She shows me everything about how the place works because she says if you're going to be somewhere, you should understand the machinery of it. Damon looked at Claire again. This time she looked back. Smart woman, Damon said. Yeah, Noah said. She's okay. Claire made a sound that was almost a laugh and covered it with her mug. The timer ticked. The oven hummed. Outside, Harlow Cove was coming to its morning version of itself. A delivery truck somewhere close. A door. The sound of the harbor doing what harbors did at 7 in the morning. Damon thought about the drive in his coat pocket. He thought about the phone calls that were going to happen in the next 6 hours. The attorney and the federal contacts he had through 3 degrees of remove. The beginning of a process that was going to take months and cost things he had not yet fully inventoried. He thought about Victor sitting on the dock's edge with the collapsed posture of a finished effort, and about Reyes managing the aftermath with the professionalism of 6 years, and about the trafficking network, and the names on the documentation, and the women on the Eastern European routes whose existence he had not known about, and who were not his responsibility, and were absolutely his responsibility. He thought about all of this, and then he set it aside because it was not 7:15 on a Thursday morning in a warm kitchen, and it did not have a timer set for 22 minutes, and it was not watching him from a step stool with gray eyes and a piece of dough between its palms. Noah, Claire said, go wash up and get your bag. Ms. Delacroix's in 20 minutes. Noah slid off the stool without protest, which suggested this was the established sequence of mornings, the timer and the oven, and then school, and the rhythm of it was so ordinary and so specific that Damon felt it in his sternum. Noah went through the interior door. His feet on the stairs going up were quick and light. Claire waited until the sound of him was gone. Then she set her mug down and looked at Damon directly, the way she had looked at him across the island the night before when she had asked him to tell her everything. "How bad was it this morning?" she said. "It's handled." "That's not what I asked." He looked at his hands on the counter. The scrapes had dried. His shoulder had stiffened during the sitting, and when he'd moved his arm to take the coffee, it had sent a clean line of pain up through the joint that he'd absorbed without showing. He was not going to tell her about the shoulder right now because it was not the kind of information that helped the current situation. "Victor is in federal custody as of 40 minutes ago," he said. "Reyes coordinated with a contact at the Bureau. The documentation from the drive covers 4 years of the trafficking operation, financial records, route documentation, personnel." He paused. "It's enough. More than enough. And the men who came to this building, 2 in custody. 1 is a medical situation. None of them are a problem going forward." Claire absorbed this. "Medical situation," she said. "He'll recover." She nodded once, tight. "And Victor?" "He'll cooperate because cooperation is the only version of this where he maintains any personal freedom. And Victor has always been a man who valued his personal freedom considerably." Damon looked at her. "He won't be a factor in your life or Noah's. I'm going to make sure of that legally and structurally, not just—" He stopped. "Not just the other way." Claire looked at him for a moment. "You mean you're not going to have him hurt?" "I mean, I'm not going to have him hurt." She held his gaze. "Is that a change?" He thought about the honest answer. "It's a choice," he said. "I'm making it clearly." Something shifted in her face. Not resolution, not forgiveness. Something earlier than those things, the precondition for them, the recognition that the person across from her was attempting to be exactly what they said and not something more manageable. She picked up her mug. "The organization," she said. "I've started the structural audit, the legitimate holdings. There are 11, manufacturing, logistics, 2 commercial real estate entities. Those get rebuilt as clean operations with proper governance. The rest goes to the federal process along with Victor's documentation." He paused. "It's going to take time. It's going to be ugly in places. There will be legal exposure that I can't fully predict yet. For you. Possibly. My attorney is working the parameters." He held her gaze. "I'm telling you this because you said you wanted all of it. This is all of it, including the parts that aren't clean." Claire was quiet for a long moment. The oven ticked. Outside, a gull called once, twice, and was gone. "Why?" she said. "Why dismantle it? You could restructure the legitimate pieces and insulate yourself from the rest." "People do that." "People do that," he agreed. "So why not?" He thought about the correct way to say what was true. "Because my name is on it," he said. "And his name is going to be associated with mine. And I'm not willing to have him grow up associated with something I knew was wrong and chose to maintain because the maintenance was easier than the alternative." He paused. "That's the whole reason. It's not complicated." Claire looked at him. She looked at him for a long time with the morning light coming through the bakery's front window and the oven warm behind her and the timer moving through its last several minutes. "Noah's going to ask questions," she said, "when he's older, about what you were." "I know. I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not asking you to. And you can't either. Whatever version of yourself you're building now, you can't build it on another set of things you're not saying." She set the mug down. "That's the condition, the only one that matters. He gets the truth when he's ready for it, not a version, not a managed account. The truth." "Yes," Damon said. The timer went off. 3 short rings, insistent, the sound filling the kitchen in the way sounds filled small, warm rooms. Claire turned and pulled the loaves from the oven with a cloth in each hand and set them on the rack. And the smell that came out with them was the smell that had stopped his convoy on a coastal street 6 days ago and started everything that had happened since: butter and warm grain and the specific clean heat of something made right. She stood at the rack with her back to him for a moment. He could see the line of her shoulders and the way they held and the way they let go of something, slowly, like a structure finding a new point of equilibrium. She turned around. "Stay for breakfast," she said. Yet, the federal investigation into Victor Voss and the trafficking network he had operated was opened formally 11 days after the morning in the terminal. The documentation from the drive provided the Bureau's organized crime unit with 4 years of financial records, operational logs, and personnel rosters covering routes across 3 continents. 14 individuals were arrested in the first 2 weeks. Victor entered a cooperation agreement through his attorney on the 23rd day, which his legal team structured as a plea framework that would keep him out of a maximum security facility in exchange for full disclosure and testimony. He was 61 years old, and the calculation was not complicated. Damon's legal exposure, as his attorney had predicted, was real. It took 3 months of negotiation to establish the boundaries of it, what he had known and when, what decisions had carried his direct authorization, what had been Victor's parallel operation versus the organization Damon had believed himself to be running. The distinction was not clean, because nothing in this kind of accounting was ever clean, but it was real, and the Bureau's interest was in dismantling the network rather than in a prosecution that would cost more than it returned. A cooperation framework was constructed. Damon provided testimony in 4 sessions over 6 weeks. The legitimate corporate holdings were placed in a supervised restructuring administered by an independent board with federal oversight. He was not free of consequence. That was not how this kind of accounting worked, and he had never believed it would be. What he was, by the end of the 6th month, was a man who had paid a specific and documented price for specific and documented actions, and who had not minimized the payment or redirected it onto someone else, and who was standing at the beginning of a different kind of mourning. He moved to Harlow Cove in the 4th month, before the legal process was fully concluded, because waiting for the process to conclude before beginning what came next was the kind of calculation that had cost him 9 years once, and he was not prepared to let it cost him more. He rented a house 3 streets back from the water, a gray shingled place with a porch that looked at nothing more dramatic than a neighbor's vegetable garden and a power line with 2 birds on it, and he made the house functional over a weekend with a practical efficiency that his neighbors, who introduced themselves on the first morning, seemed to find slightly alarming. Reyes came up on the 2nd weekend to go through the last of the organizational wind-down paperwork. They sat at the kitchen table and worked through it for 6 hours, and when it was done, Reyes rolled the papers into a folder and looked around the rented house with an expression that was not quite readable. "What are you going to do?" Reyes said, "after all this?" Damon thought about this. The logistics company in the portfolio. Harmon Freight. It's legitimate. Always was. The audit confirmed it. I'm going to run it. Reyes looked at him. Freight. It moves things from one place to another, and people pay for that. It's straightforward. He paused. I'm good at logistics. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know someone who does security consulting for mid-sized commercial operations. Pays considerably less than the previous arrangement. Are you asking if there's a job? I'm asking if there's a job. Damon looked at him. There's a job. Reyes nodded once and picked up the folder. I'll need 2 weeks to close the last accounts. Take 3. After Reyes left, Damon sat at the kitchen table alone in the quiet house and looked at his hands and thought about the accounting of a life. Not the legal accounting, which was in process and would conclude and would produce a documented number on both sides of the ledger, but the other kind. The kind that had no official format and no oversight and no cooperation framework. The kind you did alone in a rented kitchen with 2 birds on a power line outside the window. He sat with it for a while. He did not rush it or file it or perform an emotion he did not actually feel. He was getting better at that, at letting the actual feeling be the actual feeling, which was something that had turned out to be a learnable skill at 40 years old if you had sufficient motivation. The motivation was 3 streets away. The arrangement between him and Claire developed not as a decision, but as a series of small facts that accumulated over weeks into something that had the weight of a decision without anyone having formally made it. He came to the bakery on mornings when Noah was there before school. He learned the oven schedule and the names of the regular customers and the woman named Patty Delacroix, who regarded him for the first 2 weeks with the specific watchful reserve of someone who had seen Claire through something and was not going to approve of anything quickly. He did not ask Patty to approve of him. He showed up, and he was what he was, and he let the accumulation do the work, which was the only honest strategy available. Noah's questions came in the manner of all of Noah's engagements with new information, directly, without preamble, and at unexpected moments. The first significant one came on a Saturday morning in the 5th month, when Damon had been helping Noah repair a section of the bakery's back fence that had taken damage in a coastal storm, and Noah, who was passing him boards with the focused efficiency of a good assistant, stopped in the middle of passing a board and said, "Are you my dad?" Damon took the board. He set it against the fence post. He looked at Noah. "Yes," he said. Noah looked at him. He looked at him with the gray eyes and the narrow face and the jaw that would eventually harden into something Damon recognized, and he processed this information with the particular method he used for all information, which was to hold it for a moment and then fit it into the existing structure of things. "How come you weren't here before?" Noah said. "I made some bad choices when I was younger. And then I didn't know about you. When I found out, I came." He paused. "That's the short version. When you're older, there's a longer one." Noah considered this. "Mom knows the long version?" "Yes." "Did she get mad?" "Very." Noah nodded slowly, as if this confirmed a hypothesis. "She gets mad quiet," he said. "That's worse than loud mad. Loud mad is over fast." He picked up another board and held it out. "You should probably keep not making bad choices." "That's the plan," Damon said. Noah handed him the board. "Okay," he said. And that was, for Noah, the conclusion of it. Not because it was fully resolved or fully understood, but because he was 8 years old and he had a fence to fix, and the category of father had been filled in and could now be related to and worked alongside, which was the primary thing. The longer version came in pieces over the following months, calibrated by Claire, given in language appropriate to each increment of Noah's age and comprehension, never falsified, never minimized. Damon was present for some of it, and not for others, according to Claire's judgment, which he did not question because her judgment on this subject had 9 years of active development behind it, and his had significantly less. There were nights when Noah asked questions that had no clean answer, and Damon said so. There were mornings when the weight of what he'd been was visible in the bakery kitchen alongside the coffee and the flour and the oven heat, and Claire looked at him across the island and he looked back and neither of them pretended the weight wasn't there, and somehow that honesty was the most functional thing between them. More functional than comfort, more functional than reassurance. The straightforward acknowledgement that the past had a mass and that mass was present, and they were both carrying it, and they had decided to be in the same room while they did. The thing between them rebuilt itself slowly, without announcement, in the manner of structures that had been damaged and were being carefully re-examined before any new load was applied. There were evenings on the porch of the gray-shingled house, and mornings in the bakery, and a Saturday in the 7th month when they drove Noah to a beach 2 hours north, and he spent 4 hours in and out of the water with the tireless physical energy of a child in the right element, and on the drive back he fell asleep against Damon's arm in the back seat, in the specific unconscious trust of a child who had decided that the shoulder was a safe place to sleep. And Damon sat very still for the entire 90 minutes of the drive back and did not move his arm. Claire watched this from the front passenger seat, turned slightly, and she said nothing, and Damon said nothing, and the road moved under them and the coast went dark outside the windows. In the 9th month, the oven at the bakery finally failed completely, not the thermostat issue, but the element itself, and the repair estimate was $1,100. And Damon paid it without discussion, and Claire argued with him about it for 3 days on principle, and then let it go, and the oven ran correctly for the first time in 3 years, and the bread came out at 20 minutes exactly. Noah noticed immediately. "The crust is different," he said, examining a loaf with the critical attention of a professional. "The oven's fixed," Claire said. Noah looked at Damon. "Don't," Claire said. "I was just going to say thank you," Noah said. He said this with a dignity slightly too large for his face. "You're welcome," Damon said. Noah put the loaf back on the rack. He picked up the curved knife and the next piece of dough and climbed onto the step stool and began his work. The counting, or the narrating, or whatever the private process was, and the kitchen was warm, and the morning was the kind of ordinary that had been constructed out of an enormous amount of difficult material, and was ordinary now in the way that things became ordinary. not by forgetting the material, but by using it correctly. Damon stood at the end of the island with his coffee. His shoulder had healed in the second month, not perfectly. There was a specific angle of extension that produced a reminder, but functionally, which was what was required. The scrapes on his hands were long gone. The drive from Victor's chain had been handed to the federal investigators in a manila envelope on a Tuesday morning in a parking garage in Boston, and what had happened after that was the law's business, and the law was doing its work. Victor was cooperating. The network was being dismantled route by route, name by name. 14 women from the Eastern European routes had been identified and assisted through a resettlement program that Damon had funded anonymously through a legal entity his attorney had helped him construct. Because anonymous was the only version of that gesture that was honest. It was not reparation. It was not absolution. It was simply money applied to a need that existed because of decisions made under a name that was his. And the anonymity was not modesty, but accuracy. There were things he had done that would not be made right by any amount of money or cooperation or structural dismantling. He knew this. He carried it in the way he now carried most things. Not filed away, not performed, but present, available to be felt when it needed to be felt, and set aside when the moment required something else. The something else was usually in front of him. That helped. On a morning in the 10th month, Claire came into the kitchen earlier than usual and found Damon already there, because he had a key now. That had happened in the 8th month without ceremony. She had simply handed it to him on a Tuesday and said the alarm code was the same as the oven timer setting. And he had started the first oven and was reading something at the island, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at the kitchen with the particular look she got sometimes, an unguarded look that she didn't always catch before he saw it. She came to the island. She stood beside him and looked at what he was reading, which was the structural audit final report for Harmon Freight, which he had been reviewing every morning for a week because it was the kind of document that rewarded repeated reading. "You actually like the freight company," she said. "It's a good operation. It's been badly managed for 6 years, but the infrastructure is solid." "You're going to talk about infrastructure to me at 6 in the morning. The bones are there," he said. "You just have to—" He stopped. He looked at her. She was looking back. The kitchen light was on and the ovens were warming, and somewhere upstairs Noah was doing whatever Noah did in the 45 minutes between waking up and coming downstairs, which based on available evidence involved a significant amount of looking at things that interested him and forgetting to put on shoes. "I'm not going anywhere," Damon said. He said it the way he had learned to say the things that needed to be said in this kitchen, which was plainly, without architecture, without the managed tone he had spent 30 years developing. "I want you to know that. Whatever you decide about what this is, what we are, I'm not going anywhere from this town. From him." He paused. "From you, if you'll have me. But that part is yours to decide. The other part isn't conditional on it." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you anyway." "I know that too." She moved to the first oven and checked the temperature gauge and made a small adjustment. Her back was to him. "I've been thinking about what I want," she said, "for a few months. I've been thinking carefully because I have a habit of thinking carefully about things that matter, which is either a virtue or a delay mechanism depending on the day." He waited. She turned around. "I want this," she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely without performance. Not aversion. "This. The freight reports at 6 in the morning and the arguments about the oven money and the—" She stopped. "You being here. I want you here." Damon looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her through tinted glass 10 months ago in an armored vehicle on a coastal street, with the same recognition, the same arithmetic arriving at the same answer, except that this time he was not behind glass, and the answer was not something he had to drive away from. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. The interior door opened and Noah appeared in it in his pajamas, carrying one shoe. Looking at them both with the gray eyes and the narrow face and the complete unself-conscious presence of a child who had decided the kitchen was where the morning happened and he was part of the morning. "The left one's missing," he said, holding up the single shoe. "Where did you have it last?" Claire said. "If I knew that it wouldn't be missing." "Under the radiator," Damon said. "You took it off when you were reading on Tuesday and kicked it under." Noah looked at him. How do you know that? Because I watched you do it. Noah processed this. Then he turned and went back upstairs, and they heard him cross the floor and the sound of something being retrieved from under a radiator, and then his feet on the stairs coming back down. He came through the door with both shoes and sat on the kitchen floor and put them on with the methodical attention of a person completing a necessary task. And when he was done, he stood up and looked at his parents in the kitchen light and said, "Is there apple rye today?" "Yesterday's loaves," Claire said. "New batch at 8. "I'll wait," Noah said. He climbed onto the step stool. He picked up the curved knife and looked at the dough on the board in front of him, and his lips began the slight movement of his private counting or narrating, and the knife moved in a clean diagonal line, and the kitchen smelled like warm grain, and the harbor was 2 streets away, and the morning was what it was, which was ordinary, which was everything. Damon picked up his coffee. He stood at the end of the island. Outside the front window, the green sign was catching the early light. The paint still faded, the letters still slightly uneven from the hand that had made them, and the street was quiet, and the town was waking up around them. And he looked at his son's hands on the curved knife and thought, here. He had been good at leaving. He had left Gloucester in 2 hours with no preparation. He had left the convoy stop behind him in a rearview mirror. He had left the Connecticut study, the harbor terminal, the long-managed remove at which he had kept everything that mattered. He was done being good at that. He stood in the kitchen and drank his coffee and watched his son work and listened to Claire moving behind him, and the timer on the counter ticked down its deliberate count toward the moment the bread would be ready, and the light came through the window and fell across the flour-dusted island and the curved knife and the boy's careful hands, and Damon Voss, who had spent the better part of his life building things that eventually had to be dismantled, stood in the warm, ordinary morning and understood that this was the only thing he had ever built that was worth keeping.